Baby, that thing's cracked all the way through. It won't hold dirt, it won't hold water, it won't hold anything.
I know.
9-year-old Nia Merriweather was standing in Miss Helene Pruitt's driveway at 6 o'clock in the morning, asking for something out of the trash. Not food. Not cans to sell. A flower pot. A broken one, split clean down one side, the kind you throw out because there is nothing left in this world to do with it. Miss Helene stood at her screen door in her housecoat with her coffee going cold in her hand, watching this child lift a piece of garbage out of a can like it was something valuable. Baby, that thing's cracked all the way through. It won't hold dirt, it won't hold water, it won't hold anything. I know, Nia said. And she carried it home down the red dirt lane with both arms wrapped around it, the way you carry something you have already decided is yours. She wasn't planting in them. Anyone could see that. She never bought a single seed, never turned one shovel of soil, never asked her mother for so much as a packet of beans. She wasn't fixing them. She never asked for glue, never asked for tape, never patched one crack the whole time. She wasn't selling them. She never carried a single pot down to the flea market out on Route 90, and that is a 15-minute walk from the Merriweather gate. She wasn't making anything pretty with them, either. No mosaics. No garden art. Nothing new ever hung on that porch that hadn't been hanging there for 20 years. Whatever that girl was doing, it had no name that anybody in Wilcox County, Georgia could think of. By the end of that first week there were 31 broken pots stacked behind her family's barn, and she would not tell one living soul why. Her brother Jalen, 16 years old and out of patience, caught her behind the chicken run one evening while she was counting them. You know the whole town's talking about you, right? Miss Helene told Mama you're not right in the head. Nia didn't answer him. She just kept stacking, moving each one an inch at a time so the chipped edges lined up. By Sunday, 3 women were standing at the coffee urn at Mount Pleasant Baptist, trying not to laugh and not doing a very good job of it. She's got Hollis de Verau's spots, though. The ones his truck backed over. Bless her heart. But what in the world does a child want with a pile of broken clay? Nobody knew. Not the neighbors. Not the men at that church who had 80 growing seasons between them. Not her own mother and father, who looked at each other across the kitchen every single time that girl disappeared behind the barn with something else in her arms. And every one of them was about to find out. The ones laughing hardest would be the first ones standing in her family's dirt, hats in their hands, asking a 9-year-old girl to show them how. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Merriweather place sat on 94 acres of red Georgia clay, and that summer, the clay was hard as a skillet. It hadn't rained in 31 days. The kind of dry that cracks the ground into little puzzle pieces you can lift out with your fingers. The kind of dry that makes farmers stand at their own fence line at dusk with their hands in their pockets, looking up at a sky that will not cooperate. Curtis Merriweather was a quiet man. It had come up on that land, and his father before him, and his grandfather before that, and he carried the whole weight of it in his shoulders without ever once setting it down. He didn't shout when things went wrong. It just got quieter. And by the middle of July that year, Curtis Merriweather had gone nearly silent. His tomato rows were wilting by 10 in the morning. His bean plants had started curling their leaves inward, which is not laziness and is not death. It is a plant rationing what little it has left, the same way a body goes cold in its hands and feet to protect the heart. Curtis knew exactly what he was looking at. He had a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, and near the bottom of that stack was an envelope from the bank in Abbeville that he had not opened. It had been sitting there 9 days. Alma had seen it. Alma did not mention it. In that house, some things were not discussed at the table, and every person sitting at that table knew which things those were. 2 dry seasons back to back, Alma said one night, after the children had gone up. That's all it takes. That's all it has ever taken. She was the practical one. She did not deal in worry. She dealt in solutions, or at least in the hunt for one. The Devereaux put in drip line last spring. Cut their water near half. Drip line costs money we do not have, Curtis said. And even if I bought it tomorrow morning, half this place would be dust before it came off the truck. Neither of them said the other part out loud. That the man in a silver truck had slowed down at their fence line twice that month. Not stopped. Just slowed. Long enough to look. Long enough to count rows. Grandma Dessa said nothing that night. Odessa Merriweather was 71 years old, Curtis's mother, and she had farmed that same clay through droughts in the 1970s that made this one look like a mild afternoon. She sat at the end of the table and chewed slowly and let her eyes drift toward the window, toward the barn, toward wherever it was her granddaughter had gotten off to. Because Dessa had noticed something that nobody else in that house had noticed yet. Nia was not playing behind that barn. Nia was working. There is a difference, and an old woman can see it from 100 yards away. A child at play moves fast and moves loud. A child at work moves slow, and stops, and looks, and moves again. Dessa had been watching her granddaughter stop and look for a month. Because it had started a month before that morning at Miss Erlene's trash can. Long before the 31 pots. Long before the whispers at the coffee urn. It started on an ordinary Tuesday when Nia had been sent out to water the fig tree by the fence, and she noticed something odd at the base of it. Half of an old clay pot lay there, buried on its side, forgotten so long that the dirt had grown up over the lip of it. So my body had thrown it there years ago. It held rainwater like a bowl. And the grass around that broken pot was a different color than the grass anywhere else in that yard. Deep green. Seek. Almost lush, in a yard the color of a paper bag. Nia crouched down in front of it and looked at it for a long, long time. Everywhere else on that farm, water came out of a hose in wide, generous arcs, and most of it never reached a root at all. It hung in the air and burned off before it landed. It ran off the top of that hard clay and disappeared into the cracks. But here, at this one forgotten piece of trash, water sat still, and sank, and the ground drank it slow instead of losing it. She didn't tell anybody. She just started paying attention. She watched her mother water the porch boxes, fast, generous, and gone in 9 seconds, most of it running straight off the top of the soil and out the bottom. She watched to collect on a spider web at dawn and slide down the strands, drop by drop, to exactly the base of each plant, like the answer had been posted on the fence the whole time and nobody had bothered to read it. Then she asked her grandmother a question that stopped Dessa in the middle of her morning coffee. Grandma, why is the grass by that old broke pot greener than the grass Daddy waters? Dessa set her cup down slow. Because a hose waters the air, baby. That pot waters the roots. That one sentence rearranged everything inside Nia Merriweather's head. She started bringing home thin paperback books from the little branch library in town, gardening guides with cracked spines, dusty pamphlets about soil moisture that had not been checked out in a decade. She didn't understand every word on those pages. But she understood the pictures. Diagrams of buried vessels. Water moving out through the wall of a clay jar in slow, patient drops, right where the roots were sitting, instead of loud and fast and gone. The books had a name for it, and the name was thousands of years old. But the books also had a price attached. Real ones cost money the Merriweathers did not have to spare, not with an unopened envelope sitting under the mail on the kitchen counter. But broken pots. Broken pots were free. Broken pots were everywhere. Every porch and shed and back stoop for 2 miles had a cracked terracotta pot sitting behind it, waiting on somebody to finally throw it out for good. Nobody wanted them. Nobody could plant in them. Nobody could sell them. And that, exactly that, was the whole reason a 9-year-old girl could have all of them she wanted, for nothing, if she was willing to be laughed at while she carried them home. So that is when Nia started her rounds. Knocking on doors before school. Standing in driveways at 6 in the morning in her yellow dress. Digging through cans on the road before the truck came. Carrying red clay home one armload at a time while the whole county whispered and wondered and decided, without ever asking her a single question, that the Merriweather girl had gone strange. She wasn't collecting junk. She was collecting the pieces of an answer that had been sitting in plain sight, in every trash can in that town, for as long as any of them had been alive. Building it was not easy, and it was not pretty. Behind the barn, in the shade where nobody bothered to look, Nia laid all 31 pots out on the ground and studied them the way a person studies a hand of cards. She learned something that first day. She did not need whole pots. She needed pots that could stand upright and hold water for a little while, and she needed the crack to be somewhere she could reach. She dug 31 holes down the first tomato row with a trowel, one between every second plant, deep enough that only the neck of each pot showed above the ground. She set them in. She packed the clay around them tight with her fists. And then she went and got the bucket and started filling. For about one glorious minute, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever built. 31 clay mouths open in a straight line down her father's row, every one of them full to the lip, water sitting still and dark and patient in the ground exactly where the roots were waiting. Nia stood back with mud to her elbows and looked at it. And then the row began to shine. The water was not seeping. The water was pouring, straight out of every crack, all at once, into ground too hard to take it. Within an hour her father's tomato row was a shallow brown lake with plants standing in it like fence posts, and every single pot she had spent a month collecting was bone dry inside. Kalin came around the barn with a feed bucket, stopped, and looked at his sister standing in 4 inches of muddy water. He did not even have to say anything. He just laughed, one short laugh, and shook his head and kept walking, and somehow that was worse than anything he could have said. Nia sat down right in it. Right in the mud, in her yellow dress, in the middle of the thing she had been building since June, and she felt something twist hard in her chest and stay twisted. At dinner that night she did not say one word. Alma saw the mud dried behind her ears. Curtis saw the way her shoulders had gone down. Even Kalin, for all his teasing, noticed she never picked up her fork. It was Dessa who finally spoke, cutting her chicken, not looking up. First thing I ever built with my own 2 hands went worse than that. He was younger than you. Flavied my daddy's whole east field, drowned a 1/4 acre of corn we could not afford to lose. He didn't say a word to me for 6 days. Nia lifted her head. Second thing I built worked well enough to save half that corn the next year, Dessa said. And the third thing I built is the reason this family ate through 1977. She finally looked at her granddaughter, straight on. Whatever you're building back there, girl, you do not quit after it fails. You quit after you stop trying to fix it. Nobody at that table asked her what she was building. But for the first time, nobody laughed either. The second attempt was better, and it was still wrong. Nia pulled every pot out of the ground and turned each one over in her hands, and she understood the problem now. A crack lets water leave all at once. A clay wall lets water leave slowly. She needed the clay and she needed the crack gone, and she did not have $1 to buy anything that would seal it. She tried tape. The tape peeled off underground in 2 days. She tried candle wax pressed into the seams, and the wax held, but it held too well, and the wax also sealed the pot wall itself, so the water just sat in there for a week doing nothing at all while the plants above it kept dying. She had made a jar. What she needed was a loan. She sat behind that barn in the dark that night with 31 useless pots around her, and she came close to being done. She thought about every woman at that coffee urn and every one of them had been right. Then she thought about the spider web at dawn. Every drop finding exactly the right place, one at a time, nothing wasted, nothing hurried. And she thought about the piece of pot under the fig tree that had been lying in that yard, broken and forgotten and doing its quiet work, for longer than she had been alive. Nobody fixed that one. Nobody had touched it in 20 years. It was still cracked. It had never stopped working. Which meant the answer was not to make the crack disappear. The answer was something else, something she did not have a word for yet. Grandma Dessa found her out there at 10 o'clock at night, sitting in the dirt with a candle stub and a broken pot in her lap. Dessa did not ask what she was doing. She lowered herself down onto an upturned crate, took the pot out of her granddaughter's hands, and turned it toward the light. She ran one thumb down the length of the split. And she said something Nia did not understand at all. You're trying to fix it. My grandmother never fixed one in her life. Then she stood up, slow, both hands on her knees the way 71 gets you standing, and she said, be at the creek with me at 6. Bring a bucket and bring both hands. At the bend of the creek behind the property line, under the water, under the sand, there is a seam of gray clay so fine it squeaks between your fingers. Dessa went down on her knees in the shallows in her good work pants and started pulling it up in handfuls. You don't fix the crack, she said. You feed it. They carried 2 buckets of that gray clay back up the hill. Dessa showed her how to work it with a little sifted ash from the burn barrel and a little sand until it went smooth and heavy as dough. Knock to fill the crack. Don't coat the pot. A jacket of creek clay smoothed over the whole outside, thin as a pancake, worked into every seam with a thumb and left to dry hard in that Georgia sun. Pobres. Is still breathing. Bath hole. Where did you learn this? Nia asked her. Aunt Dessa was quiet for a while. My grandmother, she said. She had a kitchen garden on land nobody ever thought people like us would be allowed to own. She had no money and no pipe and no pump, and she fed 11 children off a quarter acre with buried jars just like these. She looked out at the dry field. Everybody who knew her thought it was just old woman's business. Nobody wrote it down. And when she died, it went in the ground with her, and I was too young and too proud to ask. She turned and looked at her granddaughter with an expression Nia had never seen on her face before. And then a child I raised walked past my window carrying it home out of a garbage can. There was one more piece. Every one of those pots had a drainage hole in the bottom, and a hole is a hole. Dessa handed her a dried corncob and a paring knife and said one word, weeping. Cut down to a taper, driven into the hole and soaked, the cob swells and locks and seals itself tighter the wetter it gets. Free. Seating in the burn pile. 31 of them. The third attempt took Nia 4 more days on her knees. She jacketed every pot in creek clay and set them in the sun until they rang like a bell when you flicked them. She plugged them. She reburied them. She hauled water in the bucket one trip at a time and filled every mouth to the lip. Then she sat down on the edge of that row and did the hardest thing she had done all summer. She waited. An hour went by. The row did not flood. 2 hours. The water level inside each pot had dropped a quarter inch, and no more. She dug 2 fingers into the clay 6 inches out from the neck of the nearest one, and down there, under a sun that had not let up in 31 days, the ground was dark and cool and damp and holding. It was working. It had been working the whole hour, silently, underneath everything, where nobody could see it. Which, Nia would understand much later, is how most real work gets done. She covered every pot mouth with a scrap of shingle to stop it burning off in the air, laid dry grass clippings over the whole row to hold what was down there, and went into supper and did not say a word to anybody. Over the next 2 weeks something happened in that first tomato row that a man who has farmed his entire life cannot look at without his throat closing. While the rest of that farm kept dying by inches, leaves curling, stems going thin as wire, ground turning to powder that lifted when you walked, Nia's row turned. The pale, stressed yellow-green went deep. Then deeper. The stems thickened until they had to be staked. The ground beneath that grass mulch stayed cool and dark and damp to the touch at 3 in the afternoon, while 3 feet away, the same clay on the same farm under the same sky was cracked open pale as bone. Tomatoes that had been small and hard began to swell heavy and red and pull their own vines down. Curtis Merriweather walked that row alone one evening. He ran his thumb across a leaf and felt the thickness of it. He crouched down and pressed his whole palm flat against the ground and left it there a long moment. Then he saw the neck of a clay pot sitting level with the soil between 2 plants, one gray thumbprint still pressed into the side of it, no bigger than his daughter's thumb. He did not say anything for a while. Then he called out toward the house, and his quiet voice broke in the middle of it. Alma. Come look at this. She came. Neither of them said one word for a long time. And Grandma Dessa stood up on the porch with her arms folded, smiling the way a woman smiles when she has been proven right about something she never once said out loud. Work moves fast in a small town, and it moves fastest when it is something nobody can explain. Over the following weeks a few neighbors wandered by to see the strange green rows for themselves. Micheline stood at the fence shaking her head at tomatoes thriving in ground that should have killed them in June. Kelly Zeberaux said he had never seen the like in 50 years. But most of that county held back. Everybody has seen one lucky row before. A row is not a season. The real verdict, they all agreed without agreeing out loud, would come at harvest. And so on harvest day, half of Wilcox County came out and stood along the Merriweather fence line the way people gather for a parade. Arms crossed. Some skeptical. Some just curious. Not one of them ready for what came out of that ground. Curtis backed the truck up to the head of the first row himself, and Jalen and Neil loaded it side by side. Crate after crate of deep red tomatoes so heavy the vines had needed staking twice. Thickest mid beans in numbers nobody expects out of a summer that dry. Squash and peppers that had no business surviving July, pulled instead out of cool dark ground that stayed damp under an afternoon sun that had broken every other field in that county. By the time the bed of that truck was full, it held more than Curtis had brought in either of the 2 good years before the drought. Ace stood there with his hand on the tailgate and did not trust himself to speak. Down at the road, a silver truck slowed at the fence line, sat a moment, and then drove on and did not come back. Miss Arlene Pruitt, the woman who had handed a child a piece of garbage out of her own trash can, stood at the end of that row with her hands on her hips watching crate after crate go past her. "I don't understand it," she finally said. "I threw that pot out because it was broke. It was broke. And now look." Charlie Zibidaux, whose pots his own truck had backed over, just kept taking his hat off and putting it back on. And Nia Merriweather, 9 years old, mud still under every fingernail, finally spoke up loud enough for the fence line to hear her. "A hose waters the air," she said, the same words her grandmother had said over a coffee cup in June. "This waters the roots." The cracks were already there. He just stopped trying to fix them. Nobody left. In the days after, half that county walked the Merriweather rows to see it up close. Hallie Zibidaux, whose split pot had gone into the very first working line, asked a 4th grader if she would come help him build one for his beans, and he asked her with his hat in his hands. Miss Arlene asked the same for her squash. The women from Mount Pleasant came too, and this time they came with notebooks, wanting to know exactly how deep, exactly how far apart, exactly how you work the ash into the clay. Aunt Helen, who had teased her hardest, who had laughed at her standing in the mud, spent an entire Saturday on his knees in the dirt setting pots down the last untouched row, quiet and careful and proud in a way he would have died before admitting out loud. There was no revenge in it for Nia. No gloating. Nothing but a quiet satisfaction and something brand new in the way people looked at her, which was not confusion anymore. That evening, after the truck had gone and the crowd had thinned out and the light went long and gold across 94 acres, Nia sat on the fence rail with her grandmother, looking at rows of green that had no business existing in a summer that dry. "You know what the lesson is, don't you?" Dessa said. Nia shook her head. "It was never about the pots," Dessa said. "Anybody in this county could have picked up that trash. Every one of them walked past it for years. It's about noticing what everybody else steps over. And it's about trying it, and watching it fail, and going back out there instead of walking away. That is not luck, baby. That is the only thing that ever built anything worth having." Then Odessa Merriweather got up and went in the house and came back out with the one clay pot that had sat on her windowsill for as long as Nia had been alive. Nobody in that family had ever been allowed to move it. Nobody had ever been told why it was there. It was cracked down one side, and the crack was coated in a thin gray jacket of creek clay, and the thumbprint pressed into that jacket was not Nia's, and it was not Dessa's. It belonged to a woman who fed 11 children off a 1/4 acre of land nobody ever meant for her to have. Dessa carried it out to the row and set it down in the dirt at the end of Nia's 31. She did not explain it. Nia did not ask. So many things you do not have to be told. That was the summer the Merriweathers kept their land. Not because of a good rain, because there wasn't one. Not because of the bank, and not because of the man in the silver truck who never did come back. Because a 9-year-old girl stood in a driveway at 6 in the morning and asked for something everybody else had already thrown away, and then got laughed at all the way home, and then failed twice in front of her whole family, and went back out behind that barn anyway. She never did count them again. Tell us about the person in your family who saw something in you before anybody else did. We read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.